5 game-changing mods. So I've created a few episodes now in this quote-unquote series. It's not really a series, but I did start with 3 game-changing mods and then 4 game-changing mods, and now we are back with 5 game-changing mods. If you guys haven't watched the first 2 episodes, I do really encourage you to do so. They're also mods that are super relevant and have not really been replaced. They're still great downloads that I definitely recommend. But today we are back with the 3rd installment, and today I'm going to be showing you 5 mods. It kind of makes the series take a little while because I have to find the right mods to include, and it gets more and more difficult. Regardless, what the series is all about is basically I'm showing you some mods to spice up Fallout 4 to make the gameplay and really just game experience feel quite a bit different than the vanilla game. These mods aren't necessarily meant to be used all together. You're supposed to pick and choose out of the 3 videos I have put out now some different mods to include in your game that I think are really going to improve on it, and again, most fundamentally make it feel different. If you guys enjoy the content, I encourage you to consider subscribing, or you could leave a like or a comment down below. That's how YouTube decides what videos to put at the top or recommend to other people. And even beyond that, let me know in the comments after watching this video, is there a mod you feel like I really missed or overlooked? A huge part of me creating this video was actually going through the comment section of the previous 2 and looking for mods that people either suggested or some features that people are like, well, I don't really like this about Fallout 4, I wish it was different. And then I found a mod that made it a bit different. With all that being said though, we're just gonna jump straight into it. The very first mod I am going to show you is ReGrowth Overhaul. I recently included this mod in another video going over all kinds of landscape mods, and the reason this stood out to me is because it really does just make the game feel totally different. What ReGrowth Overhaul does is a few different things. First and foremost, of course, it's going to add in a ton of greens and shrubs all around the Commonwealth. Just looking around, there's so much more to see. But even beyond that, it actually adds in a ton of new trees. I feel like this is the real reason I really enjoy this mod. These are pretty big and dense trees. Then the final and kind of smaller aspect of the mod is it actually incorporates a few different sounds. So you have like nature sounds while you're walking around and some different animals that you can kill, like bunnies, and rad stags are just a bit more abundant. The reason I really like this mod though is because of those trees, because it does provide you with a ton of new cover. Vanilla Fallout 4 has a pretty big sightline. Basically, while you're walking around, you can see pretty far in front of you and around you. With this mod, kiss goodbye to that. Personally, I think it makes the Commonwealth look quite a bit nicer, but even beyond that, it changes the gameplay. You have tons of cover, enemies have tons of new cover. Unless you have a really good perception ranking, you're not going to be able to see enemies nearly as easily as you could before. Positioning becomes a huge factor in winning fights, especially on higher difficulties and with damage mods. And even beyond all that, I feel like it looks kind of appropriate. Fallout 4 does take place quite a bit after the bombs have dropped, so it almost makes sense that some of the foliage has grown back and really grown back to an excessive degree. Think of like The Last of Us or other post-apocalyptic movies and video games. It kind of just fits that setting and theme, and all around, again, I just think this is a huge improvement if your computer or Xbox can run it. So then we have respawn relays. This I think is going to be a bit more polarizing. It's definitely not going to be for everyone. What this mod is going to do is change the way death works in Fallout 4. After installing this mod, you're going to have to install a little chip inside of your body. That's actually a cool little mechanic. You just click on the chip, but then if you take damage after installing it is dependent on your intelligence. So a high intelligence, no damage. Low intelligence, you get some limb damage. It's small, but kind of cool. But then the big part of this mod comes with the relays you do craft and thus place down. You can place these pretty much anywhere. It's not a settlement object, it's something you place from your inventory, but basically what's going to happen is you could set your spawn at any of these different relays around the map, although you will have to go to them and click on them to set your spawn. And then you'll notice once you actually die in combat, you're going to respawn at that relay. So that's pretty cool, but where it gets a bit cooler is with some of the different options this mod does have. So of course, just going to respawn you at the relay. You have everything you did have before, everything's pretty much exactly the same. It's an alternative to just loading back into the game. This definitely gives death more consequence. You're not just going to load to the past quick save, it's actually going to make you walk all the way back to wherever you were, but at the same time, if you took down 80% of the enemies, they're not going to be there anymore, so it almost is in a sense easier. Where things get a bit more interesting are with the other variants this mod does offer. You do have light, so basically you're going to respawn in the same way, but now you'll lose 10% of your caps. Then we do have heavy and hardcore. This is where things get a little bit spicy. When you die on heavy, you're actually going to lose all of your items. They're going to appear in a body bag that you're going to have to run back and get. This can be very difficult, especially when playing on survival, because you're not going to have any items. Hardcore is exactly the same, except if you die again when trying to recover your body bag, you're going to lose all those items permanently. This has a few implications on gameplay. First and foremost, you have to be very careful when playing. Death has much more consequence than on other versions. Previously, you still had all your stuff. It would just be a pain in the ass to walk back to wherever you were previously. Now you might actually lose a lot, but it also creates a pretty interesting setting where it makes sense to kind of have a stash of weapons and armor at your base. Maybe some light armor, maybe some basic weapons, but something that you can equip real quick after respawning to go and take down whatever enemies you were previously. This is not going to be for everyone. It definitely makes the game substantially more difficult. You don't have the safety net of death anymore. You can lose everything pretty easily now. But I also don't think it's as difficult as a permadeath where you die and delete your save. This is kind of a bit of a middle ground, I guess. Again, it's not going to be for everyone, but I definitely think this one's pretty interesting and without a doubt changes the game. So VATS isn't for everyone. Some people just play the game without VATS, but a lot of people feel you need something. When playing on higher difficulties or even just with some different damage mods, it's really hard to take down a lot of enemies because there's so many more than you, and sometimes you just need a second to stop and think about how to proceed. Well, that's why bullet time is going to be a great alternative to VATS, or I guess you can use it in tandem with VATS. It's basically going to slow down time to a set amount and cost you a certain amount of AP when you do use it. It's a very simple mod. It's almost like just having a jet equipped, but you can equip it to a hotkey. Again, it's going to go off your AP, so if you do have a character that's perked out in that sense, you're definitely going to have a lot longer bullet time. This is also configurable. You could change how slow the game does get and how much AP is going to be burnt per second. And even beyond that, there's a few other options where you could actually bind it to the VATS key and just totally remove VATS altogether. I personally think this is really cool. I know this is a really popular mod for Fallout New Vegas and even now for Fallout 4, and frankly, it feels a bit more genuine. You don't have the kind of cheapness that VATS does offer of getting a lucky headshot. You're still going to have to land the headshots. It's just going to be a bit easier. Then we have War of the Commonwealth. Basically, what this is going to do is increase the spawn rates of a ton of different enemies in Fallout 4. It actually has some other changes, but that's the major part. After installing this mod and walking around, you're just going to encounter enemies fighting each other, whether it be super mutants and raiders, some different monsters like death claws versus some robots. It really just makes the environment of Fallout 4 much cooler. You're going to stumble upon different events that you otherwise would never in vanilla Fallout. Now, the core part about this mod is its modularity. You really can customize it to a pretty extensive degree and even turn off certain parts. If you never want to see synths fighting, you can change that. But again, changing the rate at which these enemies spawn is very important. If you're playing on a super hardcore, high difficulty with permanent death, you're probably not going to want to see as many enemies as just playing vanilla Fallout 4 with more enemies. Fortunately, this mod allows you to customize all that. It even has some cool features like after you align with a certain faction, you can choose them to take over certain cities. Like Diamond City, for example, after aligning with the Minutemen, you could have them be stationed there and walk through on different patrols. And you can actually have the Brotherhood fly vertibirds around and set the ratio at which these occur. It really is a very cool mod. It adds a lot to the game, and it really just gives you something to do while walking from point A to point B. If you have it on one of the higher difficulty settings and this mod cranked up, you're definitely going to have to be careful. Walking out of your base is going to feel dangerous, and you can just get shot by a pretty high level legendary enemy. You're going to want to sneak around, and it really just raises the stakes of the game overall. Again, how you use this is really going to be dependent on how you want to experience the game. Do you want to be terrified at all times, or do you want just kind of occasional encounters or seeing interesting battles between enemies? Regardless, I definitely think this is a great mod to install, and after doing so, just spend a little bit amount of time to actually configure it to your liking. So then last but not least, we have better locational damage. This is a really interesting mod and one that I honestly can't believe I've overlooked up until this point. It probably has the most substantial impact on the game out of all the mods I showed you today. Basically, what this is going to do is change the way damage works in Fallout 4. There's a lot to this mod. I really encourage you to read through the page. I'll give you kind of a summarized version, but regardless, what this is going to do again is change how damage works on many different levels. First, and probably the most obvious, is going to be bleeding and stagger. So basically, after being shot by an enemy, you'll actually be staggered, so you kind of get knocked back and have to regain yourself over a few seconds. I personally don't like that, so you can actually turn it off. And also there is bleeding. After getting into a big fight and getting shot, you will have a kind of damage over time that is called bleeding. You can heal this with some different meds, and it really adds an interesting mechanic to the game. You might kill all the enemies, but you might have been so hurt that you'd end up dying anyway. There's also a kind of smaller but really cool feature where you could bash enemies from behind, instantly killing them. So if you sneak up on an enemy, you will go through a kind of melee animation, again, instantly kill them as long as they don't detect you. Then we get into the part of the mod that I think is more interesting, and that's the way it affects different NPC categories. So right now, the way enemies work in vanilla Fallout is they'll have a certain amount of health, and typically if you have a legendary enemy or a regular enemy, the health will be different. Maybe the regular has 50 and the legendary has 500. This is going to change all of that. Now for humans, you're only going to have a health pool of 100. It doesn't matter what human you encounter, they will have 100 health. The difference in difficulty is now going to be in their armor. If they have really powerful armor, they're probably going to be a legendary. If they have little armor, they're probably going to be a normal variant. This mod also includes levelless changes, so you can actually have enemies spawning with better armor, and also it makes headshots and chest shots on humans much more powerful. This goes through all the different enemies though, since they're going to be kind of like humans but just harder to kill overall, having slightly more health and having slightly more armor by default. Super mutants are going to have much larger health pools. They're going to be less dependent on their armor because they kind of are just a superhuman. These small creatures are all around just going to be really easy to kill. You're not going to have problems with radroaches or blood bugs because that's not what they're meant to be. They might be a nuisance, but shouldn't be a huge or difficult enemy to take down. But then on the flip side, the large creatures like death claws, behemoths, Mylar queens are going to be a pain in the ass. You have to be prepared to fight them or you're going to lose that fight. This mod also has a bunch of smaller changes, like shotguns will actually knock back enemies now. Ghouls are going to take more shots, although it's much easier to knock off their limbs. And even a smaller one, but it requires F4SE. If you have a helmet on, it'll actually register that there's a helmet. Like if you get shot in the face, it'll do kind of full damage and probably kill you. But if it gets hit in the helmet, it's not just going to be a base armor stat. It's actually going to hit the helmet and not hurt you. It's a really small but cool mechanic that I really think adds a lot to the game. All around, this is a pretty massive mod. You kind of have to look and read over it if you want to take this on in your game because it does change a lot. Personally, I think for the better. That's pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. It's definitely longer than some of the previous ones, but I feel like some of the mods in this one were a little bit more intricate and detailed. If you guys did enjoy, I encourage you again to consider subscribing. If you feel like I forgot one, let me know in the comments down below. But with that, I'll see you all next time. Later.